don't know if people have takes on this, but like, these things aren't human. So are we making a mistake by trying to treat them as humans and trying to teach them as we would teach a human to do?
I made a proxy for OpenAI to Anthropic and dropped GPT-5 into Claude Code, which actually, it turns out, he told me it breaks the terms and conditions, but it's okay. It's totally fine.
If next month one of the model providers comes out with like online learning or sort of like long-term memory, how much of our code is just sort of like irrelevant at this point?
Thanks for joining us at the table. This is a new series we're starting at South Park Commons to share a lot of the conversations we have internally in the community. For context, SBC is a community of technologists who are all exploring what's next. We call this period the -1 to 0. Today, we're going to be chatting with a bunch of folks who are all friends of SBC about how the software development lifecycle is changing and where coding agents and code gen is going. To kick us off, I'd love to hear from Charlie.
Cool, thanks for having me. My name is Charlie, and I'm working on Conductor, which is a Mac app that lets you run a bunch of Claude codes all in parallel. And it's kind of a funny story how we got here. Last summer, we realized that coding was moving a level higher than the IDE. Cursor's Tab had just come out, and Tab is amazing, but it just felt clear to us that like things were gradually going a level higher than an IDE, and there's something was coming next. So we tried to build a GUI around Aider. And there's a lot of reasons that I'm excited about GUIs that I can go into later. But the problem with this idea was that Aider was running on Sonnet 3.5, and it wasn't quite powerful enough to let you stay within the same app. Like too much of it, you couldn't go end to end with the Aider framework in our GUI. So we kind of gave up. And then a couple months ago, we started getting obsessed with Claude Code, and we realized the engine to power this GUI, this like next generation of IDEs, had arrived. And so we started building a prototype of Conductor internally for ourselves, and then quickly we realized that it was so powerful that and so exciting that we just had to release it. And so that's how we ended up where we are now. And now our North Star is building towards whatever comes after the IDE. I'm hesitant to put a brand on it. So some people are saying agentic development environments or frameworks or whatever. I'm not ready to go there, but we're working towards whatever comes a level higher than the IDE.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm Ben Hylak. I'm a co-founder of a company called Raindrop, and we're building Sentry for AI products. So we actually started off building coding agents almost 2 years ago now, and we just realized the process of trying to build something like that was so different from traditional software. And the thing that we really got obsessed with was how do you sort of monitor agent behavior? How do you see, is something better than something else in the real world? And yeah, that's the problem that we solve.
Thank you. I'm Oliver. I'm building Mesa. And we're really focused on this problem of the collaborative surface areas for software development. I think it really comes down to this core belief that actually when you work at a large company, most of the bottlenecks that you find in the process are around consensus building, right? And I think the most obvious one is just pull requests and code review, which is really a multiplayer activity. It's not just an individual dev in a terminal or an editor. And we find that that's actually where a lot of slowdowns happen. It could be code review, maybe it's planning. It could even be sort of a root cause analysis or anything like that. And we think if you solve these problems, you can dramatically improve the speed of development and potentially eventually lead to what we call sort of the living code base, where things start to happen a lot more autonomously, even without a human in the loop.
Awesome. And my name is Harrison, co-founder at LangChain. Our North Star is to make it as easy as possible to build intelligent agents. So we think LLMs are great. They're going to transform what applications look like. They're going to look more agentic, more smart. We still think it's quite hard to build these reliable agents. And so we think there's a set of tools, primarily developer tools, that we'll try to build to make that as easy as possible.
Sweet, thanks for sharing. I think one of the most sort of dominant tailwinds that has started to change how people are thinking about building software more generally, right, is there's so many more people across the spectrum of technical ability that are building software. So by volume, almost by weight, right, there's just a lot more software out there today than there was a year ago or even 2 years ago. A lot of this has been sort of spoken about before. I'm curious from folks who are sort of more, around the table, if you will, what tailwinds are people not talking about that you think are actually really important, either as undercurrents for this change or things that will come as a result of it?
I think one thing, and it kind of goes to your point, is that there's a really huge difference between code that is written by AI and code that's written by humans. Like, it's a huge difference. The kinds of failure modes each have are wildly different. Like, when AI is writing code, you can have kind of like an entire file that's just like doesn't even need to exist. Like, it just like it's completely wrong. Where like humans more, it's like generally smaller things, you know what I mean? And I think it's very interesting because when you're just using GitHub, you have no attribution, right? You have no idea what was written by an AI, what was written by a human. And like my first step of reviewing a PR is often like, did you mean this? Is this real? Is this not? Like, so yeah.
Yeah, we started commenting on some of our code. This was written on purpose by a human.
And to that point also, like you'll often have cursor will just even like autocomplete will just remove some parts of code that is like slightly out of distribution. You know what I mean? I'll have to write like, do not change this line. This line is intentional. Like that's what exactly.
And like as a byproduct of that, when I'm writing code with AI, it will often I'll do a big refactor and it will change a bunch of the code that you wrote, which often is okay if you wrote it with AI.
Yeah.
But if you wrote it and it says written by Ben, like written by a human with human thought, then I will not easily, like I'll actually like think for a second and be like, okay, I probably shouldn't have wrote this all.
Another example is comments, right? Like I noticed that like it will often remove comments when it's like generating or fixing code. If it's an AI written comment, like they're mostly garbage, but like sometimes like remove very important comments, like context is what else that team added.
As you guys are talking about, this kind of reminds me of like protobufs and those things where you auto-generate the files and it has the big comments at the top. Like, this is auto-generated. Do not modify. I wonder. Maybe we're going towards something like that with AI.
Well, I'm curious what granularity you sort of like label that code at. Is it just like on a file basis or
No,
like
no,
a function?
It's like above a function or above like something that looks kind of weird. Often it's like looks weird on purpose.
Yeah.
Are there parts of your code base where you're more or less restrictive of AI?
Totally.
What?
There are like, for example, there's a migration file. And I tweeted about this. And at the top, I say, no matter what you want to do not change anything in this migration file. And sometimes the AI will still change it. I think in general, like if the AI is writing like a totally new file from scratch, often it's like front end related, then it's like way more free reign. Like it's okay if like it's gonna write hundreds and hundreds of lines of code. If it's interacting with our core infrastructure at all, our rule is look very closely at the plus minus lines added. And if it's negative, then fine. Like we'll probably just merge it without looking too closely. If it's a couple hundred, then we'll pay a lot of attention.
Have you like baked that into CI in any form?
We've thought about that, but no. Yeah, we probably should.
Yeah, it's interesting. You almost want to like lock files or directories. Like we have really strict rules around like anything that's going to like touch like ingestion, anything that's going to touch like, like auth or like these sort of things. Like, we can like lock those at a CI level, but like, yeah, it's like in cursor, you actually like just want to be like, don't touch these.
Well, it's actually kind of fascinating, right? It's like, there's this odd sort of recursive loop that's happening with a lot of these sort of like agentic systems where like an OpenSuite, for instance, right, is probably one of the biggest contributors to OpenSuite itself. So in that dimension, it's sort of an interesting question around where the lines blur between a product, presumably that you're selling to other people or that you're using yourself, and the infrastructure itself that's underlying that product. I'm curious, like, would be interested in hearing just the general story of that project, but more broadly, right, like, how do you see that line between product and infra changing?
Yeah, I mean, so OpenSuite is a project that we built on top of LangGraph. Async autonomous coding agent. We built it basically because coding has clearly been the biggest vertical that's been changed by AI, or where a lot of success has been had. We want our. I think the question that we think a lot about is like, what do the agents of the future look like? And we want our infra to be good for those agents. And so we do think of them as separate things. We built OpenSuite largely to like just test that our infra would work for that. We never built like a IDE because that was just like too much work. But with these, but now these agents, like the agent is the product basically, and so like because like our products just build it, it was like very easy and made sense for us to kind of like do that. So yeah, we still view them as separate. I would say for like a lot of our core infra, that's not written by AI. One of the big things we are thinking a lot about, and I would actually love advice or ideas from folks here, like how do we get Claude Code to be really good at writing LangGraph code, like up to date with the most recent, like is it a Claude.md file, is it MCP, like that's one question we're thinking a bunch about.
I think this is actually the biggest open question for me because like I debate with a friend of mine about this where he thinks it's like impossible to basically build a dev tool right now because like you're kind of at the mercy of like Anthropic, right? When I believe when Anthropic released Claude 3.7 and their system was on 3.5, they upgraded and like their whole thing just like stopped, like it just failed, it stopped working. And basically they spoke to the whole
It
like
failed when they upgraded.
When they upgraded, yeah, it just became terrible. And so then they spoke to the Anthropic team. And the Anthropic team was like, oh yeah, we RL'd the model to use these very specific tools. So they had to like update their entire internal like product basically to have the same tools.
Yes.
And so his whole take is like, well, it's very hard to add like novel capabilities that like the model providers haven't baked in. And so like if someone can figure that out, I think that would be extremely valuable.
I mean, I think that's what everyone that we work with wants to do. Like, I think that's why they're using LangChain and LangGraph is because they don't just want a chat GPT clone. They want it for their data or for their domain or something. But I think I mean, this is why I think it comes back to like context engineering and why that's the term that exists now and why it's also hard. Like I don't know, like there are a bunch of different things. There are so many different things you can try.
Yeah.
I do think that like, I mean, the reason we built OpenSUI is because I think coding is the space that's just going to be ahead of the other ones because that's where model labs are RLing their models for, and there's stuff to be learned there. So like, how do you make Claude Code good at library X, library Y? And I actually think there's a big market for that. And I actually don't really think there's a great answer for that right now.
But I think that's true. I think that there's this sort of like the problem with the idea that it's like a bad time to build a dev tool or like because they're at the mercy of is like it's true in the it's like literally true in the sense that like yes they even like deprecate models really fast like you know what I mean, and so it's like you can build something around a model like 6 months later it's gone. And it's like, there's no sort of like, here's what's gonna break when you upgrade. It's just like, you just kind of have to find out. Like, it's absurd if you think about it from like any normal software engineering. Like, imagine just like there's a new library. It's like, yeah, well, this is gonna break something.
Yeah. And it has a different brain.
Yeah,
like, it literally has a different brain.
Well, the other one doesn't work anymore. Yeah, so it's like, it would be absurd, right? Imagine Stripe doing this or something, it'd just be absurd. But then again, like, there's so much advantage to being the first mover in something. At least it seems that way now. Like Cursor, if Cursor had that mindset, it wouldn't be Cursor. You know what I mean? Like they were just like half of like building software right now just means like surfing the wave and like being quick to adapt to these things. Like you have to be at the front. So
yeah. You said one other thing. You said the agent is the product, and I'm curious how true you think that is going forward. Because I think like one thing I'm seeing with a lot of agents is kind of they're very much converging in terms of capabilities. Mostly because the foundation model is like eating a lot of the capabilities. Whereas like, so we explicitly didn't want to build a code review agent in the beginning. We just wanted to focus on like the GUI and like the sort of sticky UX part of it. And then we realized it's actually really hard to integrate with some of these existing code review agents and our customers were asking for it. So we were like, all right, I just like built one in a weekend and we're like churning people off of like the market leaders. And I'm like, I would love to say I'm just like a genius engineer, but the reality is I'm just delegating most of the work to like the foundation model. And so this world where you can just put foundation model in a loop, you give it a set of tools and like a system prompt, like, will these agents stay the product going forward, or do you need to like go to a different level?
I think there will be a different level. I mean, I think like the UI UX around the agents are really interesting to think about. I think Conductors like raise that level. I do think like the CLI based coding agents are very close to being kind of like bare bones.
Yeah.
But I do think it will. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a bunch of like. First of all, I don't know. Like, I think that's the fun space part about this space. Like, no one really knows. But I think like there's a few different dimensions it could go. Like one, like there are like like UIs matter and they're good for certain things, and even for the simpler things, like having that as part of the agent is interesting. But then second, like when you start to let's assume that okay, these agents are just really good, they start to become the product just like in coding. Then how do you manage 10 of them? How do you, like, that's a very different type of UX. And I think that's super interesting. I don't know, like, I mean, you're the king of this.
Yeah, that's
so.
like, yeah, what we're thinking Yeah, I think one thing that's happened that's really interesting is this cycle of, in the olden times, humans wrote code, humans then reviewed the code. Then, like, starting about 2 years ago, like, the humans and AI started writing the code, and then we have humans and AI, like, reviewing the code. And then like there are more and more of these products like Greptile or whatever that like review your PR. Now we're going to AIs write the code and humans are back to being reviewers. Like we purposely don't want the AIs to review the code because it wrote the code and it's great at churning out a lot of lines of code, but it might not necessarily be the best judge. And so I think like one interesting direction this is all going is back to humans as like the final reviewer. Like they give the final judgment. And when you have like armies of Claude codes writing a bunch of code for you in different parts of your code base, you need something a little better than just like the default GitHub PR review. And I think to give away our secret plan, like Conductor is going to look more and more like a review, or potentially will look more and more like a reviewing work app. Maybe even like you could think of it like a superhuman, and it's like giving you an inbox of all these things I've worked on, and you can like quickly go through and review it. And the agents are going to be like the under the hood view, where it's like sometimes you want to get in the loop and say like, actually don't touch this file, but more and more you're not going to be at that level.
I think that, so one of the things that we've worked on in the open source is this, we call it like agent inbox. And it's basically this idea that like, when you have a lot of agents that are either running for a while or kicked off by background processes, because I think one of the things we think is there's a lot of events in enterprises that should trigger agents and they might not have a human in the loop at the start, but you still want a human in the loop. And we call it agent inbox. It looks like some combination of like an email inbox and like a customer support board almost. And you have the agent can be stuck in different states. Like, I want to commit this file. I have a question for you. Like there's different things, right? And yeah, I'm pretty bullish on that as a direction. So excited to see what we come up with.
Yeah, and it also like it actually fits. It's not that crazy if you think about it, because it's just like humans are already used to like managing other humans, and like communicating between them and like going up throughout an org. But it's just like now more and more of the org is an AI mind rather than a human mind.
I think you can. It's interesting because you can sort of do something like this with like Greptile today, and like it's interesting how like like I actually do find that the code review aspect, AI code review, is helpful.
Yes,
actually, like it's a really good first pass. It often catches weird stuff that the cursor is doing in the first place, like kind of across different files, or like, oh, this is actually not used, for example, right? Like those sort of things where like it'll never flag that. And then so if you use the GitHub extension, the PR, they have like a PR review extension. You can like really easily click and like see all the comments and go. So like I'll often just like push a PR and then like just really early as soon as I start working on something, and then just periodically be like checking the comments that like Greptile is like feeding into the PR.
Totally.
There's a related thread that I would love to sort of pull on there, right? Which is this question of where does so there's the model, there's the harness for the model. Maybe there's like some other product at some point that is independent in the sense of Claude Code, right? It's like there's Sonnet, there's Claude Code, and there's Conductor. And then there's this question of like, okay, well, where is the harness ending and beginning, and where's the product that's using that sort of core capability beginning and ending? And there's actually a quote that Ben wrote in sort of an essay recently that I want to read out, and then I'd be curious for your thoughts, and then other folks as well. Ben writes, models have actually become really malleable, so LLM harnesses that teach a model about its environment and its goals have outsized impact. It's this harness, a combination of model, tools, memory, and other methods that makes AI products actually good. Relating to something that you were mentioning earlier, Oliver, right? It's like, there's an existential fear for anybody building a developer tool right now that the engines of progress are dramatically unpredictable. You have no idea what these models are going to be RL'd on. You have no idea what things will break. I'm curious with you, right, thinking about this harness question more sort of presciently, like how do you sort of see the shape of the harness more broadly changing? And I think that's probably relevant for other folks as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, first at a high level, like taken to the limit, there's a world where the agent does everything and you don't need a user interface. That feels like that will probably happen, but in like a really long time. And that's like really hard to imagine right now. And then the base case is like what we have today, where the agent can do a lot, but the human needs to be in the loop for a lot of it. And so I think that world is going to exist for a long time, where the humans are going to be in the loop, and it's just going to get higher and higher level, like what they're reviewing and like how they're managing the agents. And so that's why I don't feel like every time Cloud Code gets better, it's like I think of it as like the engine powering Conductor improving, and then we can just like move a level higher in Conductor. So like that's at a high level, like how I see things. I also think like, yeah, the question of the agent versus the harness is really interesting. I actually asked Boris, the Cloud Code creator, about this because I was feeling so confused because GPT-5 came out and I dropped GPT-5 I like kind of reverse engine, like I made a proxy for OpenAI to Anthropic and dropped GPT-5 into Cloud Code, which actually, it turns out, he told me it breaks the terms and conditions, but it's okay. It's totally fine. He didn't mind. But anyway, I tried that, and everyone was hyping up GPT-5 that day. This was the launch day, and it just was so atrocious, GPT-5 inside Cloud Code. And that was a little confusing to me. And so it feels like there's like, kind of like there's three possible states of the world. Either like the agents matter, the model matters, like, and the model is like a good model, just rules all. Then there's a world where like the harness matters and like a really good framework will like solve problems. And then there's like, which now feels like the obvious state of the world, which is a mix of both. And I asked Boris, like, what percentage is harness, what percent is model? And he said it's 70-30, like 70% model, 30% harness. And so I was like, well, doesn't that just mean like the next time like a model comes out, like so much of your work is like wasted? And he was like, yeah, like we'll have to, and they're constantly updating the prompts, and like it's constant work to like adapt the model to the harness. So that's like a long-winded way of saying.
I'm curious, does he equate, or at least sort of?
Yeah, I like how now the bar.
Yeah.
Sorry if I say anything you didn't mean. Yeah.
I'm curious. Well, him and others who are building in the space, right? Do they equate in some ways this environment for improvement and the harness?
What do you mean the environment?
As in, like, when we're saying that these models are getting RL'd to be better at certain things, right?
Yeah.
Or like learning these tools really well.
Yeah.
The tools in some ways like are certain ergonomics of the harness.
Yes.
In question, right? So I guess when you say that 70-30 split, not to say that you have to be a spokesperson.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, when they're talking about the harness, to what extent are they also sort of talking about the environment in which the model is actually improving?
I don't really know.
Yeah.
I think, and I don't know if anyone really knows. Yeah. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, for example, you'll notice that the sort of, so both like Anthropic models and OpenAI models, they're both being RL'd for like different tool calls that have different names, right? It's really subtle, but like it's very hard to, for example, for sort of canonical ones like saving memories, searching the web, like these sort of things, like you can't kind of have your own tool with a similar name that does something different. Like it will just like perform really, really terribly. Or like a tool that does the same thing, but with like a radically different name. And you'll kind of like feel this, you can kind of see this like very evidently, like as you try to build things on top of them. And so I think there's like that's like one thing I've noticed a lot when you look at like, if you try to shove like GPT-5 into like a different product, you'll notice it like calling it with the wrong arguments, calling it with like it really was RL'd for like specific things. Yeah.
I mean, I think even beyond being RL'd for things like, I don't know how portable models actually are and interchangeable. Like I think prompts have always been something that you've kind of had to, and maybe at the start, sure, great, it works for both, but then, you add some conditions, oh, it's not obeying, so like, let me try all caps. So, and that works really well here, but and so I think, I don't know, I think these models, I mean, the weights are clearly different, and so then like, they just expect different things, and some of these are different tool names, some of these are like prompts that show up. Some of this is how like context engineering is done as well. Like I would argue like the harness is just doing context engineering in a particular way. And so yeah, like those methods of context engineering probably don't transfer, just as methods of prompting don't always transfer. And
I'm actually really curious about this question of context engineering almost as a discipline and as a practice, right? And so many different folks work with LangChain across different industries like finance, insurance, other sort of developer tool companies. What are the patterns that you're starting to notice great context engineers embody that versus ones that maybe are just doing it for the first time?
I think like, okay, so one of my takes is that the hardest part of anything is just like understanding how something works, like really understanding. And this kind of gets to what we were talking a little bit about some of the AI code review. Like I think like sometimes when I use AI tool, I use it for front end code. I don't know front end code. I don't understand any of the code it's writing, right?
It doesn't really matter.
But I think the same thing goes for like agents. Like I think the best context engineers really understand the problem that they're trying to solve and like kind of like put themselves in the agent's position and like models are not mind readers. Like you have to tell them what to do. And like, just as you're teaching a smart intern or giving a smart intern tools to do something, like you have to, so I think like the best context engineers really understand that. And then whether that comes across through as prompts, as tools, as part of the workflow, where there's some deterministic parts, some non-deterministic parts, I think that's all a bit case specific, but I think like it all boils down to just like actually understanding how the job is done. The thing that worries me there is that, and I don't know if people have takes on this, but like, you know, these things aren't human. So are we making a mistake by trying to treat them as humans and trying to teach them as we would teach a human to do? That's the part that worries me. But so far, at least, I think most people are.
Like, wait, why does that worry you?
Because like, where, you know, these things are clearly not humans. They have different strengths, different weaknesses. So like when I try to, you know, I'm building like a LinkedIn sourcer bot to help us source candidates. And like, I teach it as if I would, you know, was talking to another human, or like I try to get it to do what I would do as a human if I was doing that. Is that just like a you know, local minima, like shallow way of thinking?
Yeah.
Well, there's some evidence of that, right? Like, I don't know if you guys have seen DSPY or something. I don't know what the actual way to pronounce it is, but I believe the way that works is like it's sort of, you sort of give it examples and then it figures out the optimal prompt. And you look at the prompt, it's kind of just like gibberish, but I guess it just performs better. And so that's like some evidence that's actually, maybe we shouldn't be taking the same like human-centric approach to it.
This kind of this reminds me, I'm curious your guys' thoughts on this. Like, this reminds me, like, do you remember like 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe it was like 2 years ago, like it was such a big thing to like craft a perfect prompt to like give to cloud, and people were like so obsessed with like, and for good reasons, like if you say like, if you don't do this, my grandma will die. Like there are all these like
persistent problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, early Mid-Journey, people had like the craziest prompts that they were sharing.
And so it's felt like I was under the impression, and now I'm actually questioning it, hearing you guys talking about this. So I was under the impression we're moving more and more to a world where you can just like say in a sentence, like really plainly, like what you want. But like what you just said, and also what you were saying about how much the harnesses matter, feel like they go counter to that. Like it's still actually, even though I've tried it, and a GPT-5 in Claude Code's harness like sucks, it's still kind of surprising to me. Like I thought these models were getting so smart, you don't need to like give it all this like special prompting. Like why? What's the answer to that?
I have so many thoughts on this. So like, I remember Paul Graham had this tweet. It was like I generally a very smart guy. I really like his writing, but he had this. He had this. We'll have to see if we have to cut this out or not. But no, he had this. Like I did YC. You know. Okay. So, but he had this one tweet that was like, you know, when we get to his definition of AGI was like that, like something like you can really easily tell it exactly what you want. I forget exactly how he worded it, but it's something like you can tell it exactly what you want in like a sentence and it'll just like go do it. And I was thinking like, actually like telling a person what you want is really hard. Like, especially thinking about like a new hire on their first day, you're just like, okay, like go add this feature, you're good? Great. And like, you're like, I'll check in with you. Like, so I think, and it's funny, like GPT-5, for example, I do think it is like insanely instructable. Like it really adheres to exactly what you tell it. But then like you find out like, oh, that actually has problems. Like if you have any sort of typo in your message, like you're like, you know, make the button say like whatever and you misspell it, it literally just takes it verbatim because that's what you told it to do. And so like, you know, obviously you're like, no, like you want it to sort of like interpret your request a little bit. You have a little bit of judgment that like you didn't mean to have a typo in it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really tough problem.
Yeah, I think one, completely agree with that. Like, I think like a single sentence isn't enough. And like, if you think about like, there are probably situations in which I could impart an idea to you in a single sentence, but we also have some shared history and background that we're not
the same. Yeah.
exactly. And then two, but to that point, like one trend that I do think is happening is that the models or the harnesses or whatever you want to call them, I think in a way they're starting to do more of their own context engineering. What I mean by that, I think you had a tweet where basically, like when you, I think using like file system is a way to let them do this. Like rather than just shoving everything into context, you put it in this spot, you give it tools to like read and write and manage its own context basically. And that is definitely a trend that we're seeing in terms of context engineering. That makes it like way more flexible, I think, and that will only get better as the models improve as well.
I'm curious in that sort of axis, right, which is almost the model's own UX for managing its own context, right? It's sort of interesting because the model's context at some point becomes the organization's context. In the similar way that, even at SBC, we recently we're sort of, it was really interesting when we have a ton of applications for our fellowships, we do a bunch of triaging, right? And we say, hey, this application looks great, this one doesn't look as great. And in the past, we were writing that for nobody in particular. Like there is no audience for those notes. So we did a pretty shitty job. We didn't put any notes. And then this cycle, we're like, wait, there's actually this other audience out there in the world that is actually going to be paying a ton of attention to why do we think this person's really interesting? Why do we maybe not think this other person's super interesting? And that other audience, right, in some ways is this deeply sort of high context memory, right? Like it can remember a lot of facts. To your point about you're not collaborating with somebody who's not a human, right? Like it can remember tons of facts. It doesn't really forget things in the same way. Maybe it makes other silly mistakes. And it's sort of really fascinating in some ways how much internal knowledge we have to start adding into these sort of triage notes where we're like, no, IIT is actually a really great school from India, but MIT is actually not part of the same system. Sounds very similar, different places, both great, different things to look for. And I guess the question I'm asking sort of with this thread is, where do you guys see sort of organizational memory and in some ways like the agent's own internal memories that they're generating and using sort of converging or diverging, right? Even within your own teams or within the products within the people that are using your products?
Well, this is a big problem for us. Like we're constantly debating about it because I feel like most of the work that we do for sort of like our harness is really just a substitute for long-term memory, right? It's a substitute for figuring out, okay, like what context does the agent need right now to basically tailor it for this specific like user or org or workflow or whatever. And I think like, we constantly talk, it's like, okay, if next month one of the model providers comes out with like online learning or sort of like long-term memory, how much of our code is just sort of like irrelevant at this point? And then is it easier to do a lot of the human-centric stuff where it's like, hey, this is actually just how you do something in my org, and it'll just remember that, right? And then like the next time you tell it to do something, you can give it the one sentence prompt because it has that context already. But I think that's like a big open question, right? I think like we kind of have to build for now, but also be aware that like the ground can just shift completely within like a couple months.
But I think one thing I've noticed about memory is it actually requires really good judgment in a way that people don't like appreciate. Like
from humans or from the LLMs?
Yeah. Like you'll notice like you can see this in ChatGPT, you can see this in Cursor. Like you can see Cursor every once in a while it'll pop up the little thing on the bottom left. It's like, the user always wants like so and so thing because I told it to like change the name or make something kind of like it's just like I just meant saying this reply. But ChatGPT does the same thing where it's like you tell it one thing about some preference. You're like, no, I want to find a place that's like maybe more expensive or something like that. And then it's like the user prefers like more. I say it in cool ways. You're like hi, that's a baller, And so it like really requires a lot of like judgment. It requires judgment in when to save it, but also when to almost like revoke it. Like, if I keep asking for something different, 20 times, like maybe it's like, oh, well, maybe he doesn't like, French food anymore. Like maybe I should, it's like, and so, yeah, it's really tricky. I'm actually not sure that models are smart enough to do that well.
I think this is one of the harder benchmarks that like we've experimented with memory a bunch. This is definitely one that's gotten better as the models have gotten better, but it's like really bad for even like relatively recent models. And I think that when people talk about memory, I think that like this reflection step of the LLM, like memory isn't just the raw stuff. It's some reflection on top of that. And when people are doing that right now, most of the place where they're spending time is on like crafting prompts to remember, what not to remember, and updating things there. And the actual like memory storage is pretty simple. Like it's, I think in often cases it's just a string that just goes into the system prompt, or maybe like a list of strings. Like, but it's still pretty simple.
Which also has its sort of like own issues, right? Because like some kinds of memory is like, if the user's like, I want you to be more like, strict with me on a certain thing, or like I want you to kind of critique me more, or something like that. It's like, yeah, it could like just add that to the system prompt or something at best. Well, certainly if you kind of do a retrieval kind of step, like it might never come up. You know what I mean? But then even if you were to add something like that to the system prompt, like we're talking about like crafting a good system prompt is hard. It would be hard to craft a good system prompt to make it the right level of like, critiquing and like allowing certain things. So there's almost behavioral changes that users want that they might think of as part of memory, but it's like,
I mean, I think relating to something you were mentioning earlier, right, which is like, what is great UI UX for human in the loop workflows? Too many acronyms, but in general, right, I think it's sort of this extension of, you're kind of always writing system prompts all the time, and they're all kind of high stakes, right? In the sense that when the agent is delegating a request back to the human, presumably this is actually requesting some element of human judgment that is a priori not obvious. If it were obvious, it would just do it, right? So I guess I'm curious, like, what are the principles that you guys think are sort of like starting to come to the fore as you're building, with Raindrop, there's a lot of human in the loop workflows, right? Where it's like, this is a path, this is a behavior. Is this a good behavior? Is this a bad behavior? You can get a ton of false positives, tons of false negatives. I'm sure a part of the product taste and actually the design of Raindrop, it's probably not just the UI UX of the app, but actually like when to delegate things to a human who might be using the interface, and when to just consume those internally and not bring something up. And I mean, it's somewhat similar, right, with folks who are building on LangChain, right? Like if I'm having this really sort of fancy swarm of agents that are doing something, I do want to surface for error at some point, but almost even knowing like when judgment is necessary, regardless of what the judgment actually is, seems like a really sort of thorny set of problems.
It is, and LLMs are also bad. They're really bad at this judgment step of like when humans are needed or not. Like, you either get something where it's always going to ask or it's never going to ask.
I mean, humans are bad at it. Humans, I like should ask someone for help. I can figure this out.
We are.
One thing that you said, which I absolutely agree with, is like human in the loop and memory, I think, are really closely related. Because if I think memory is really learning through interactions with the external world, and humans giving feedback is a big part of that. And so I think like, human in the loop's great for a lot of reasons, but being able to empower memory I think is absolutely one of them. That being said, I also think that most products today don't have this, or at least they don't have what I consider memory in them. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. Like I think the first step that most people need to do is just get the product to work. And it's often simpler to do that without memory. And there's still a bunch of good reasons to have human in the loop to get the product to work, regardless of memory. But I do think the next stage we're starting to see a few companies start to think more about memory. Interestingly, though, there's different types of memory. There's kind of like this learning through interactions, which I think is a big piece. But to the point that you made earlier about like organizational context and agent context, there's all this organizational context that maybe like just existed before, or existed in non-agentic processes that you might want to bring in. And that's probably like right now we probably see most people focused on, hey, how do I bring all of this into the agent and give this to the agent in some form? Like, what does that look like? Is it giving it access to it in RAG? Is it doing some extraction and distillation to like a system prompt? Who knows? But that's probably like the biggest thing. And then like, I think the question you asked is really interesting. Like, is that organizational context the same as the agent context? I don't know if we've seen enough examples of that really in the wild to have kind of like a strong opinion there. I do think, to the point that you made about DSPy, like part of the reason why like blindly, like I think having prompts that are human readable is great for a variety of reasons, and this auditability and also sharing it with folks.
It's sort of this interesting tension, right? Which is that the divergence between your future human developers and your future AI developers that's sort of exactly at that nose, right? Where there is a world in which, yes, like if you have an AI engineer who can read thousands of languages and read every chain of thought in whatever language that chain of thought might happen to be, it's totally fine and actually is very future facing and flexible. But if you imagine a world where humans are going to need to actually interpret, use, and contribute to software, maybe that's brittle and doesn't actually last. I'm curious, like on this sort of almost dichotomy that you phrase of, or I guess we both phrase of agentic memory and organizational memory, I think it would be interesting to hear about Raindrop, because I think a lot of the core product, right, is almost bringing to the surface this whole world of interaction that in some ways is somewhat opaque to the organization, right? Like I'm sure a lot of your customers don't actually know what people are doing with their agents, if you call them agents. And so I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah,
constantly.
it's actually a really good question. And it actually kind of goes back, I think it's where we started to get this insight around like the whole, like, you know, it's very hard to actually describe what you want an AI product to do. We would have, like just taking something really simple, like, you know, a customer would come to us like, okay, I want to know if my agent is forgetting something that the user told it. And it sounds really easy. Like it sounds like you just ask, like you send it to an LLM, you're just like, hey, look, if the user forgets something, like, or if the user says that the agent forgot something, like I want to flag it. But what you'll find is that like actually the user will be like, they'll be playing a game or something, and it's like, oh, yeah, you forgot to ask me like so and so. It's like, oh no, actually we don't care about that. So it's like they're just playing a game. The user will be like, wait, are you forgetting things? I never said that. And I'm like, no, actually that's a hallucination. And like we're, you know, obviously we also want to tackle hallucinations, but that's not like it's not our memory system. Like we don't care about that. And it's like, as you start seeing what gets flagged, you actually just come up with this, like, you actually have this entire, you know, rule set you want to classify on. The way we discovered this originally actually was that we, when we first started the company, we had, you know, this was like the whole like labeling and classifying thing. It was going to be a very, very small part of like a bigger thing we were building. And so we decided to like manually annotate, like I think we were screening people's prompts, one of our first customers, for like whether they were violent or not. And so I took 50% of that, and there were like thousands. So I took 50%, and my co-founder Alexis took the other 50%. And then we took it all, we tried to train a classifier on it, and it was just terrible. Like the results were terrible. We're trying to figure out, oh, what's wrong with the model, whatever. And I look at the data and I'm like, wait a minute, like this is not violent. She's like, no, it is, because like, there's a car crash and like that's violent. I'm like, yes, like I don't know. You know, so we just have these like wildly different rule sets we're classifying on. And so just bringing it back to your question is like, that goes for like what a good response is, what like a good, like what are the kinds of things you care about. And you really, like a lot of our product is like, how do we sort of like in a non-painful way pull that out of people, like get them to start seeing something and make it really easy for them to just like keep refining their definition of that thing, explaining why. So like one of the cool things is like we ask when they make changes, we look at the changes they made and then ask them why they made it. And we can often guess like, oh, okay, you're saying that like these kinds of things are not violent, for example. And you're like, oh yeah, that's what I mean. Maybe we can extrapolate more. So that like asking users questions, what we found is that LLMs are really bad at deciding when to ask users questions, but they're very good at asking the questions or formulating the questions. So you'll notice this with deep research, for example, where the first step of deep research is it's just like it's not like it decides to ask you clarifying questions or not. Like it just is programmed. Like they force it to ask you. Sometimes it's like comical, right? I don't know if you've noticed this, but you'll ask like you'll have a very, very specific prompt, and it'll be like, okay, so I know like everything, but like, do you mean by French restaurant? Do you mean like northern France or something? You're like, what? You know, and so, but like those in the default, in most cases, asking those questions are useful. So asking questions is a good way.
Okay, quick question, which might be helpful for us. How do you then take those memories and like, how does the language model then like incorporate those memories? Is it literally like a system prompt and they're like, it's like, here are all the things the user has told you? Or is it like, does it have like a get memory tool? Or like, how does like get those memories like surface back?
It's a good question. So what it does is like, it essentially, you're defining either like good things or bad, like good, we call them signals, like semantic signals, good semantic signals or bad semantic signals in your product. When you refine one, when you like provide that feedback, we kind of go back through everything we label, we go back through the model and we use that to like
essentially update all the data and retrain based on those things.
Oh, I see.
And so then we also are kind of compiling a list of all the questions that you've answered for that signal. And so we can pull that in for like more conversational parts of the product as well. So we understand exactly what you mean, not just the title, not just the description, but like.
I see. Yeah, the reason I ask is because I think you brought this up earlier. It's like, how do you get the model to, like, how do you actually like in the code get the model to remember what you want it to? And like our best answer, which isn't very good, is like updating the Claude MD. And I've written I tweeted recently about like everything we put in our Claude MD because we have put a lot of thought into it and it does improve the results. But it does feel kind of lame to, like, for example, Claude loves useRef, like the React hook, like it just loves useRef.
Me too.
And useRef is like not that, yeah. Like you shouldn't be using useRef all the time. Claude Code also like loves fallbacks. So we say no matter what, like if you are using a fallback, like you need to get my permission and it needs to be like an incredibly good reason. And you need to say like, I'm being a very bad model and I want a fallback. And we like have all these things. And it just feels kind of lame that like, it's like, just put it in a markdown file that Claude like reads sometimes and like doesn't always follow. So that's why like, I'm pretty curious like how people are actually.
Do people like, can Claude update its own Claude MD? Is that something that people do often?
Yeah, that is something people do. I just like, I don't fully trust it to update its own. Like there's also the Claude like memory feature, which we actually just added into Conductor, where you can just like, it's basically another markdown file where you have like memories, which Claude will read. And Claude, you can get Claude to update that too, but I kind of want to decide, I want to be the arbiter of the Claude MD.
So like our approach to this is kind of like, we think sort of rules or memory or whatever is just really attached to context. So like behind the scenes, we kind of just store them as like an array in a database. And then oftentimes they're built by the user, and then the LM can sort of suggest new rules that they think like you should save. And you know, we try to make it really easy to create these rules. And then we actually let the user determine sort of when it gets pulled into the context, right? So like we can say like, okay, if you're editing a very specific file, then you should pull in this rule. Or like, you know, a specific part of the code base, or maybe actually you're just, the PR is written by like a specific author. You should pull in this rule. And then we even let them go a step further and just say like, okay, do you literally just want this injected into the system prompt? So it's like really front and center. Or do you want the LM to decide when to sort of even pull it in further, right? And then we just expose the tool as like or the rule as a tool. And we just give it like a brief description or like a name or whatever. And the LM can sort of judge and say like, wait, based on what I'm looking at, that rule kind of looks like maybe it applies here. Let me go read the larger rule itself. Now, I don't know if that level of control is sort of optimal long-term, but I think like one, it just lets users sort of like manage the context better. But I think it actually just lets us get more granular. Because I think like really it comes down to like memories are just attached to context. You know, you see a flower and you remember, oh wait, I was supposed to buy my girlfriend flowers, you know? And so I think that's really like the most important way. That's why I don't like just like the giant Claude MD file.
I mean, I think that there's also this really interesting broader question around coding tools in general, which is synchronicity. Do you like async experiences? Do you like more synchronous experiences? And one sort of way to invert the question, I guess, is, well, the difference between asynchronous workflows and synchronous workflows is kind of just adding some different time step between context and memory, right? In some dimension, right? Which is like, with an asynchronous experience like a Claude Code, it's actually really important that my memories are really well preserved and are sort of curated and maybe dangled in front of the model in the right ways. But if it's synchronous, maybe my memory is actually just always at the fore. So it doesn't really matter as much if you remember all of my habits, if you sort of are just able to write good code in the moment, and I'm always able to intervene at any given moment. And I think that I've always found this dichotomy pretty interesting, because it felt a year ago that people were like, no, yes, the future is super synchronous. We're just going to have jetpacks as we are writing code. The engineer is going to be in the weeds, in the IDE, doing a bunch of stuff. Feels like a couple of days ago, a couple of weeks ago, the tenor has changed a little bit. But then I also have other friends who are like, I can't use Claude Code anymore. I don't use Cursor anymore. I'm actually just writing code. And like this all sounds.
That feels great, by the way.
So,
do that? It feels so pure.
Yeah, and they're like going back to the roots.
Turn off the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, exactly. Notion just has offline modes, and they're like, I'm fully off the grid. I guess I'm curious, like, how do you guys generally feel about this sort of dichotomy between synchronicity and asynchronicity, and how does that generally sort of bode, in your opinion, for what kinds of tools people are going to be using.
It's funny that you say, I actually feel like the meta has been the opposite of what you said. And the reason I say that is because I remember pitching like the very first version of Conductor like last summer, and every VC was like, how are you gonna compete with like Devin? Like Devin is just gonna like run it all end to end. And now it feels like people are like coding in the loop with these like TUIs or like CLI tools and like very much in the loop. So it does feel like actually that's like the vibe has gone from like fully async to like actually like I'm like alongside the AI. But I also have a bit of a cop-out answer, which is like, I think of it the same way as coding with other humans. Like sometimes you just want your intern to go like build a feature end to end. Sometimes you want to like pair program with someone and you kind of like figure it out together. Sometimes you want like in between. And so I don't think there's like one answer. I do think when we're building Conductor, we're realizing that like more and more of the work can be asynchronous. And so that means we always want you to be able to go under the hood and like chat with Claude and do the like turn by turn chat UI everything experience. But more and more we're moving towards like you're the founder mode level. Like this is the overview of all your agents. This is like your inbox, like we're talking about. Because the models and like the agents are just going to be able to do more and more asynchronously.
Yeah, I think Sam Altman has like StarCraft analogy, which I always find really compelling. Where it's like you'll probably have like a CEO, some people directly under him, and just like tons of like agents. And whether those agents are like people or agents, like it's not super clear, but like just people that are more just like they're doers. They're like the bullets in the barrels and bullets analogy. But as far as like today though, it's interesting. Like I think I do find myself reverting back to more and more just like I'm just gonna use autocomplete. I'm gonna try not to use I'll use chat for like more questions or reviewing my code, but like I find that the harder the work is, the worse it is, that sort of stuff. I think front end stuff I'll often still just like I just want it to look correctly and like rendered, like a performance.
A lot of hate on front end.
I know.
I will defend front end.
I love CLI. I wish front ends didn't exist.
Or we're trying to hire for like a front end engineer. So
this is a competitive advantage Conductor has, by the way. All our competition, they don't like the front end. So
to be clear, like I was a designer at Apple for like 3 years, so I like front end. I just don't like writing front end code, specifically React code. I just hate. So. But I do find myself using Devin a lot for like when we get a customer that sends us a ticket, if it's something that like clearly we're not gonna like stop the company to work on, but I'm like, I think like Devin might be able to do this. And I also know that it's not gonna like incur some sort of like design debt or tech debt. It's like they want a button to copy something in a specific place of the app. And I'm just like, I don't wanna like check out a new branch. I don't wanna like whatever. So like I'll just like kind of fire it off to Devin. I think it goes back to your inbox thing. It's actually kind of smart, right? Because a part of it is like I'll go back to Slack eventually and be like, like which, or go into like the PRs and GitHub and be like, maybe like I'll check out a couple that like Devin did and see if any of them like worked. And like if they don't work, it's not like pretty low downside. So I think that's like pretty much how I use it right now.
I've had a similar experience. I'm basically back to writing code fully. And basically, I'm mostly on the back end right now. So if I'm doing front end stuff, I'll have AI write it. But I feel like everyone talks about these agents as being like junior engineers. For me now, it's like actually the inverse of that. Where if you just look at like my cursor chat history, it's just all questions, like Socratic. I'm literally just like constantly asking questions until I understand like everything I need to know about the system and how it should be that I can just implement it myself really well. And I find it's really good at that. And it's also really good at like debugging if there's an issue. And especially GPT-5, it just like one shots these problems that I'm stuck on for like hours. And so part of me kind of feels like all the tools are geared towards actually having these agents work on the micro level and like writing lines of code. And I think like we need better tools for allowing these agents to like move larger building blocks. This goes all the way back to your first question. I actually think like the tailwind that's really underrated is sort of building those tools for the agents to do like the bigger building blocks. And I feel like a case in point of this is sort of I was trying to do a refactor with Cloud Code, and I literally just wanted to move some functions from one file to another file in one of the parts of it, and it did it right. It deleted the function code in the original file, moved it or like rewrote it in the source or the destination file. But then I have to check the whole thing because it's writing the new function line by line. And I'm like, I actually don't know if you copied it exactly correctly. And I feel like we just need, like the agents need to be able to say like, no, actually just move the function, right? Instead of like rewriting it on a line by line basis, literally as an operation, just move the function or like refactor this module or do something more at like an AST level or even just a higher level. And I think this tooling just doesn't exist today.
Well, it's also really interesting because that if you pull on the thread even further, you sort of rethink. I mean, I think one framework that a lot of people have within their predictions on how sort of value will accrue in future enterprise products, right? Is like, oh, we believe in a future where each vertical is going to basically have their own king of the sort of the territory, right? There's going to be X company for legal, X company for healthcare, X company for finance. But what's actually really quite fascinating is if you look at the history of software over the last 20 years, right? Like the reason why Salesforce is a massive business is that, well, it's kind of a fintech company. It's also kind of a legal tech company. It's also kind of a healthcare company. And it's also interesting if you think about the sort of Devon case with Cognition. It's like, well, if Cognition's out there at Citibank writing tons of code, is that actually just the most productive fintech application level company out there? Potentially, right? Because software has been one of the core drivers of productivity for a lot of these verticals in general, right? And to your point, right, which is how do we build better interfaces for these models to just do more economically useful work, which might not be streaming tokens, but might actually be moving functions or might actually be migrating code bases between different languages, et cetera. I guess the broader question I'm curious for all of your takes on is how do we almost think about the new kinds of jobs, right, that you guys as programmers and builders are going to be doing in this future world, right? Like, it sounds like a lot of your work is reviewing and monitoring. Obviously, you're creating a new class of conductors out there in the world watching these trains go around. Maybe for you, right, it's like people who are observing their pets in the wild almost in some ways, like interact with other people. So I'm curious, like putting that to the group, how do we almost imagine the practice of programming and software engineering changing now that we have this very dynamic and sort of productive substrate?
I mean, I'll maybe tackle it from the point of view of, we think a big part of software is going to involve LLMs, and so how will that change? Kind of similar to kind of like what you were saying. We see that there's a different type of folks who are using. We have Langsmith, which is debugging and observability. There's a different type of like AI quality engineer that's in there, and they're oftentimes non-technical. They're subject matter experts. They are basically looking at the pets, seeing what's going on. I think it's very similar to kind of like code review in some way, in that like code review is the output of an agent. We have the outputs of agents and traces, and people are in there observing it. It's a little bit different because it's more after the fact rather than in the loop. But I think this idea of someone reviewing like the software code review for X domain, I think is a pretty interesting idea.
I'm curious, like, do you believe that the coding agent market, right, more broadly, is a large category you mentioned earlier, sort of maybe in some ways at the sort of tip of the spear in terms of what kinds of work can be done with LLMs? How do you sort of think that will splinter into sort of sub buckets? Do you think it will? Does it even make sense to say sort of code gen company, or is every application level company a code gen company at some point, just solving particular domains?
Feels like a higher level question than anything I ever think about. I did hear, I was listening to an interview with Dario about this where he was saying, his point was that coding is the biggest use case for the Anthropic API, partly because language models are really good at coding, but also partly because the types of people that are going to use Anthropic's API and like trying to be at the bleeding edge of like what's possible are like developers in Silicon Valley, and that there are a ton of use cases for like finance and medicine and legal and whatever. Like there's a long tail of use cases that like people aren't really talking about because like we're all engineers and we're all like in San Francisco and we're all like want to try new things. I don't know if that like really answers your question, but like I do think the fact that it's good at code generation doesn't mean that it's like it's really good at like lots of other things too. It's just like we're so like
I feel like I'm picking the smartest people in the world to disagree with today, but like I wonder. So for my take on like why it's good at programming is like more like it's one of the only things where like the token to like value created like ratio makes sense, and that you could like justify the amount of money that's being spent training the models. Like if it was like, oh, taking to the extreme, if you're like, it's the thing that, creates recipes for you or something. You're like, okay, this model, some future model that's going to take like $300 billion to train or something like that. The rates are going. You're like, could that ever possibly justify it? It's like, no.
But isn't that the same? I don't know if I buy that, right? Like, if you think of legal and just like contracts, right? Like
it's also the lowest risk though. Sorry, that's the other thing.
Okay.
Is like healthcare. Like yes, you could probably replace a doctor, but like that's so high risk. And with how good the models are right now, that's like really, really tricky. Yeah. That's. I mean, I would like to be wrong about that, but that's the argument against why you could do it for healthcare and
right.
legal.
I mean, something that
And regulatory. Sorry, is the other thing, is that like you just can't penetrate those rockets well. Like obviously Harvey sort of has, but like there's just some regulatory arbitrage there. Yeah.
I do think the place where agents are best suited right now are where they can do a long period of work, but still come up with like a first draft of something. And I would put coding in that category. Deep research, I think, is absolutely in that category as well, right? Like deep research doesn't publish some blog with my name under it, produces a report, and then I can decide what to do with it or not. And so I think there's probably parallels. I know nothing about legal, so I probably shouldn't speak, but I imagine there's some parallels there. And I do think in general, like one of the things that we tell our customers is try to think about what those UXs could be. Because I do think, the more work it does, obviously the more valuable, but there's a ton, the models aren't 100% accurate.
And maybe, and that thread is sort of interesting. I mean, the last maybe question I'll pose to folks here is I think something that's like really top of mind, both for your customers as you're thinking about building out their teams, whether they're building on top of LangChain or something like that, is you guys are all building your own teams as well. And I'm sure you guys are all hiring on a variety of different axes. It's a bit of a, it's hard to know what the question actually means, but I think it's something that's interesting, which is you're all very sort of AI native founders in some sense, right? Like how do you screen for people who you think in some ways should be building the tools that the people who are using your tools are building, right? One day, right? In the sense of how do you screen for people who you think will be productive today and will continue to grow with the models and with the technologies that are out there rather than in some ways be left behind?
Yeah, for me, it's very qualitative. It's are you the type of person that is anxious that you are not burning tokens 24/7 to like make the most of this new alien intelligence that has like landed on Earth 3 years ago? Like, are you the type of person who is like, it's like, I am so excited to just like throw more tokens at everything. And like, that's the point of Conductor is like the type of people who are like, I just want like more tokens. And so, for me, it's like, I think there's a surprising number of people who like aren't that excited. Yeah, they just like aren't that excited about AI and like, that's the big, like, I think if you're really excited about it, everything else we could like teach you. So that's my first thing.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this before. I've like been treating a lot too much race. But definitely that excitement about AI is really, really important. I think the one unique thing about being kind of more at the infrastructure level or more at like you are, like whenever you have like a lot of like customer data and is that like that, what you find is that it's often very hard to change things later, right? So you sort of need to there's certain kinds of decisions you have to get right, or it's a lot easier to get right the first time. That's something that like has been really interesting, is that like we do really need people that are really thoughtful and really ideally if they have experience like specifically scaling things is a weird skill. Like have you not just been at a big company, but like have you actually like learned how to scale something? I think that as far as like screening people, like more and more it's like we can't tell anything from someone's resume. We can't tell anything from someone's personal website, their projects. Unless if like they have a lot of GitHub stars, actually is like a high signal for us, for example. It's like, do people actually use this? Like in the past, like when you create a project, like at least you would probably use it. Like it was probably for you at least. And it's like now people there's these zombie projects. Like we'll have a GitHub repo.
And at least like it took some work, like some mental
effort. At least you thought about it, at least the name or something.
Yeah.
But like, you see these sort of like zombie GitHub profiles with like 100 projects, 0 stars, 0. They're all just like, they're just AI, one-shotting them all. So we try to get to like a phone call as quickly as possible. I'll ask someone the question like,
what thing have you made that you're the most proud of? You know, and then I want them to explain how they made that thing to me.
Yeah, we basically just bring people on site as fast as possible. I think like the biggest thing is just culture at this point. It's like, are you just excited about the space and like the possibilities? I do think the fundamentals of CS are becoming actually more important, not less. You know, you kind of asked before about the role of like software engineers and how it's changing, and I actually really don't think it's changing because like I think you were always hired by a company to basically deliver a product. And I think the fact that we had to like muck around with like low level code and sort of like, what is it called, like bike shed or whatever, around like different coding patterns and stuff, was kind of just like a side effect of us having to get really fine grained. But I still think like you need to understand the system at a high level, right? And it's like, why are you putting these parts in these different places and how are you sort of organizing everything? And so we really look to make sure that like, someone understands why the PR does what it does, right? And like, can they explain their code deeply? And then maybe like the counter to that is like a little bit about what you said. I think a lot of people who are maybe older or more, you know, traditional devs who are very good traditionally, I think sometimes they fall into the trap of like, they remember like what the models could do or what their limitations were like 6 months ago, right? And I think there's some level of it, like you kind of have to always be sort of like retesting what these models are capable of. Yeah. You just need to have optimism in the models, right? Like you should be realistic about what they can't do, but like that's constantly changing, right? So we sort of look for those two axes.
Yeah, I'd say the main thing that I look for is just like understanding, whether it's in technical or non-technical roles. Yeah, I think understanding is really hard. And with AI, it's getting really easy to churn out stuff that you don't understand. I think this also, I would argue this actually ties into the GitHub star comment you made as well. Like I think if you make a repo that people use in star, you probably understood some problem well enough to build something, and then also probably like have a nice README that explains why people should use it. And that's actually really, like teaching's hard. Like that's like the highest form of mastery or whatever. Like, and so yeah, I think understanding, yeah.
I mean, I think it's a wonderful place to wrap. And thank you all for helping us understand this space a bit more, and appreciate you guys spending time with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.